So the question circulating around the whole internet since the end of World's Strongest Man 2020 is Brian Shaw retiring after that performance that he put out this year, which was, in many eyes, disappointing?
Ciao, homie.
Welcome to My Block Strongest Man, where we bring attention to the world of strongman and show you how you can mimic those activities using everyday objects all around your own property. If you haven't done so yet, consider subscribing and remember to hit that bell button for all notifications so you'll know whenever I provide all the valuable content every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. So without further ado, on to today's topic. So today we're going to try and attempt to answer that question. So we're going to go through the following things in this video. One, what is it that exactly happened at World's Strongest Man 2020? What kinds of things could have caused that? Was this a disappointment to the fans, and how about to Brian himself? How does this fit into Brian Shaw's placing trend over the years? What does this mean for his legacy and for the fandom, what we think of his legacy? And finally, we're going to decide, is Brian Shaw retiring from Strongman, and what has he said about this topic? So, first of all, what happened at World's Strongest Man? Well, let's go take a look at my spreadsheet where I did my analysis on the World's Strongest Man finals results to remind ourselves what happened. Well, first of all, Brian came in 5th. He missed the podium. He even missed 4th place. So he came in 5th place with 35.5 points. The events in the finals were as follows. He got 4 points in the loading medley, so to remind you, that's 7th place. So here's my little key here. So he came in 7th on the loading medley, which was a 275-pound anvil carry into an 1,100-pound yoke that had 3 dirt bike motorcycles on it. He then had 8 points in the keg toss, which is very good. That's 3rd place. The log ladder, he again, 4 points, which is 7th place. Deadlift, he ended up splitting points with Tom Stoltman, but again, beaten out by a lot of guys. Novikov did better, Caron did better, Pritchett did better, Bishop did better, and so that would be 5th place, and he's splitting the points on 5th place. Hercules hold, 5 points is 6th place, and then Atlas Stones, he did very well, coming in 2nd, as I had expected, with 9th place. So that's what happened in the finals to Brian Shaw, to have him come in 5th. Now, to be fair, there are more guys below him than above him by 1, but to also be fair, Brian Shaw has set such a high standard for himself in the past that we all tend to think that 5th place is disappointing. So what are some of the things that could have caused that? And, if you watch Brian discuss it in his own video here on Shaw Strength, he talks about some of the kind of things that we were all thinking about. So one, he's a husband and a father now, which wasn't the case at the beginning of his career. He's running 3 businesses. He talked about potentially putting too much pressure on himself. So he wasn't actually sure what happened and what was the major cause, but he kind of postulated a few different things, and that's one of the things he mentioned. He also mentioned maybe investing too much of himself in making sure that the other competitors were treated right, and he's been putting together the Shaw Classic, which was an incredible kind of outpouring of generosity from him when it looked like a World's Strongest Man competition wasn't even going to happen this year, just to give the athletes something to compete in. So a lot of that may be true. I think a lot of it is true, right? Like, which of these is kind of the most compelling argument for what happened to him? All of these things, I would say. Brian Shaw seemed to me in the Facebook clips to be, scattered isn't the right word, but a bit distracted. Like, he seemed to be distracted by circumstances like events changing and the hurricane and things like that when I say them in that way, you think, well, duh, hurricane is a really big deal. It is, and every competitor had to deal with those things, and Brian Shaw admits as much on his video. All of the things that kind of went wrong for everybody. And so I just expected that someone with this many years of experience at the highest level in World's Strongest Man, all of these years he was actually qualified in 2008. I just don't have that one here because that's hard to plot on a chart. But so between 2008 and 2020 is a lot of years of experience. So you would expect that event changes and weird implements and stuff like that wouldn't bother him and wouldn't even cross his mind like it would for some of the younger competitors who did just fine with some of those changes. So I found that really strange, but I guess sometimes, your character and your psychology is your psychology, right? Sometimes you can't help the things that bother you. Some things that bother me, don't bother anybody around me that I know, and some things that bother them to me seem minuscule. So I think that's just the psychology of the human being. You kind of can't help what bothers you sometimes. And so that's what happened at World's Strongest Man, and those were kind of the influences, some of which were surprising to me. So, was this a disappointment to the fans? I would say a lot of fans expected him to win this year. A lot of other fans, maybe more, some would argue, expected Kieliszkowski to win before he went out with the injury. But you have to admit, once Mateus was out with his tricep injury, the majority of the internet was picking either Brian Shaw or JF Caron to win World's Strongest Man. Nobody was saying Brian was going to come in fifth. A lot of it is revisionist history, and after it happened, people are saying, well, he's been on a steady decline this whole time. And although, there are people who thought that ahead of time, it certainly, I don't think, was the majority. The majority thought he would podium. Even if he wasn't going to win, he would do well. He would do better than fifth. So I would call it a disappointment to the fans. So what about to Brian? What does he think about this? And again, if you go back and watch his video here, he discusses that, yes, without a doubt, he's flat out saying it's a disappointment. It's not where he expected to place. There are these circumstances that may have bothered him more than they should have. He may have been distracted by working on too many things at a time, and he didn't say it was unfocused, but I think you can kind of draw that conclusion that he was suboptimally focused, we'll say, not unfocused. But things like that. I saw him pick up the anvil, and not that he dropped it, but he kind of had a real minor slip that caused a fraction of a second or maybe a second delay on what would have been his actual time. And sometimes a second can mean a couple of placings, right? So just little things like that. So he's flat out here saying, he's saying it in a matter-of-fact way, but he's saying, yes, it's a disappointing finish. I put a lot of effort into this, and it's not the outcome that I expected. So disappointing, I think, both to the majority of fans and to Brian himself. So now we talk about how does this fit into his placing trend over the years. And so what I tried to do was put both the World's Strongest Man placings and the Arnold placings on this chart if we're going to talk about Brian potentially retiring at this point, because you'd have to consider his performance in multiple events that he would perform in that year. And so if we look at World's Strongest Man, again, I kept 2008 out because he qualified but didn't have a numerical placing, so I'd have to make it 11 or something weird to make the chart work. And then as you look at the chart, the other thing I would mention is you'll see the numbers are in reverse, so that the better he places, the higher up the dot is. So I wanted, good to be up high and bad to be down low. So that's why the numbers are in reverse from what you'd usually see on a chart. Now, blue line is World's Strongest Man. Red line is the Arnold Strongman Classic. So if we look at World's Strongest Man, again, Brian in 2008 qualified. 2009 was third. 2010 he was second. And in 2011 he was first. So in those 3 years, podium all 3 years. 2012, he was fourth, so just missed the podium. 2013, he wins his second. 2014, third again. 2015, wins. And 2016, he wins. 17 and 18, third place. So if you look at between 2009 and 2018, Brian Shaw was on the podium every year except 2012, which is amazing. It's an amazing career that no one can take away from him, no matter how he's performing now or will perform if he decides to go on with his career. So in 2019, he has his worst placing ever at 6th, which, isn't terrible. He's still in the finals. And then 5th this year, so ever so slightly better than 2019. But again, there were quite a few injuries. Janasha was out, Kiliskowski was out, Kearney was out. There were a bunch of guys that were out. Some guys were injured, taking away their ability to make the finals, like Gabriel Pena, for example, Singleton, like guys like that. Graham Hicks got hurt as soon as the final started. So, with so many injuries, and there was at least one. I think Wesley Claiborne went out with a positive COVID test, if I remember correctly. So with so many guys out that could have been in Brian's way, and for him to still place fifth, I think is disappointing. And I'd have to go do an analysis of previous years to see if that many injuries and kind of alternates happened, but it just seemed excessive this year. So if we look at the Arnolds, do we see the same pattern? Well, his first Arnold was in 2010, and so it's kind of easy to chart this because he began his career in World's Strongest Man and in the Arnolds kind of not so far apart in years from each other, 2 years apart, and so you can get a lot of overlapping points. So in the Arnolds, he placed fifth in 2010, where he was second in World's Strongest Man. 2011, it looks like he won both of them, and then 2012, he was fourth in both, so an eerie kind of pattern going on there. 2013 and 14, he placed second in the Arnolds. 2015, he won the Arnolds, again, a year that he also won World's Strongest Man. And 2016, second in the Arnolds. 2017, he won the Arnolds while placing third at World's Strongest Man. And then 2018, second at the Arnolds. And 2019, a huge drop-off, which is this giant red line kind of skydiving downward. And so if we look at the trend over the years, the dotted lines are the trends. The blue, again, is the trend for World's Strongest Man, and the red is the trend for the Arnold Strongman Classic. Both trend lines are going down, and so what you can do is you can play around with these trend lines a little bit as well, but before we do that, let's just kind of see where they're landing. So at this point, the end of the lines, I forecasted them out 5 more years, so 2025. So if he were to compete until 2025, the Arnolds, he would be around 4th place, so off the podium there, and World's Strongest Man, he would be around 5th place, or between 5th and 6th, closer to 5th. So the trend says he's not going to come back and suddenly start making podiums again at this point in his career, given the overall career trajectory. Now, what we can do with the trend lines is make them a little more specific than an overall career trajectory by picking a polynomial line. And so let's do 2 orders on the polynomial on both. And if we pick that and then go look at it, it's even more drastic. So now it's like, 10th is the lowest. There's only 10 people in the finals, right? So forecasting this out, this is saying in World's Strongest Man, considering not just the overall trajectory of his career, but like one of the twists and turns. So a polynomial looks at kind of fluctuations, twists and turns in the line. And so since I picked 2, it will look at a rise and a fall. If it rises, falls, and rises again, for example, 2 doesn't pick that up. So we'll adjust that in a second to see what that does. But this is saying, computing for a rise and a fall, it expects him to fall even more, like to 21st place, like out of the finals in the Arnold, and in World's Strongest Man to about, 13th place, so out of the finals there as well. So if we add kind of more detail to that polynomial trend line and make it in order of 3, and then make the Arnold in order of 3, it becomes even worse. It has World's Strongest Man has him at like 19th place, and there aren't this many guys in the Arnold, but very bad, let's say. Now, the interesting thing that happens is if you add a 4th order to the World's Strongest Man polynomial, it suddenly takes into account his upswing last year. And let's do that for the Arnold as well. And so for the Arnold, it's still saying really bad. But for World's Strongest Man, it's hard to tell here, but it swings back up because it's taking into account that last upturn between 2019 and 2020. But again, it has him at like 5th place, so it's not none of these trends are showing that Brian will come back and win World's Strongest Man again. So that's how it fits into his trend over the years. So what does this mean for Brian Shaw's legacy and for how we view his legacy? I think it doesn't mean anything. I think it means that he's following a trajectory that any great champion follows, and they're not great forever. He was great for a really, really, really long time. Like I said, between 2009 and 2018, he missed the podium one time. I'd have to go look and see how Big Z did in that time period, but it's the rare strongman that has this kind of career. And again, he can't be great forever. And even this year at 5th place, there were more people below him than above him after, beating up on his body for all these years. Same thing with the Arnold. He had a precipitous drop in 2019, but look at all these 1s and 2s in the years before that. Just an incredible, incredible career. So, what does it mean for Brian Shaw's legacy and for what we think of his legacy as fans? I think we're all going to say that Brian Shaw had an incredible legacy, and I think that most of us are going to say he's the second greatest strongman of all time after Zydrunas Savickas. I think that's what we will all say. So the final word on this is Brian Shaw retiring from strongman after we've all looked at all these analytics. So I'll tell you what he said, and I'll tell you what I think. So when Brian Shaw was discussing on his channel whether based on everything that's happened here and where his career is, whether he's saying that he's retiring as of this moment from strongman, he said no. But he also said he's not saying he's not retiring either. He's saying he hasn't made a decision yet, which is a bit surprising. I thought that he would come straight out and say, I enjoy competing, and, so what if I didn't win? I just love competing in strongman so much that I will continue for as long as my body will allow me. That's what I expected him to say. But what he said instead was, I'm not saying I'm retiring, and I'm not saying I'm not. I'm going to enjoy the holidays with my family and think about it and make a decision later. That's basically the summary of what he said. So my opinion, is Brian Shaw retiring from strongman or not? No, not in 2021. He's going to look at 2019 and say I did better in 2020 in an extremely tumultuous year that was incredibly crazy for everybody on Earth, including myself, and was made even worse by hurricanes and tornadoes and changing events on site at the World's Strongest Man. And I would like to give myself at least another year to see if I can bring that placing up. I don't think that he's thinking I'm afraid of Novikov and these younger, speedier, powerful guys that also have speed that are going to now suddenly ruin my career. Like, I don't think he's thinking that way. So that's my opinion. Brian Shaw officially says on his channel he doesn't know yet. He may or may not retire, has not made a decision. I say he will not retire in 2021. After that, we'll see how he does in the following contest, but that's the final word from my block Strongest Man. So if you like this video and want to learn more about any of the products I described during this video, make sure to check out the links in the description below. So if you like this video and haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing using that button right there. And also stay tuned for some other videos that you might love blooping up right there. This one is the one that YouTube thinks that you will like the best, and this one is the one that I think you will like the best. As always, share this with everyone, and until next time, ciao, homie.